The war had gone on so long that the galaxy had forgotten it was supposed to end. It had a name, of course. Everything that lasts long enough gets a name. The Vethani called it the unbroken grief. The Koran called it the long keel. The 40-odd client worlds caught between them called it, simply, the war because there had never been another one worth distinguishing it from. 214 years, 11 generations of Vethani, 9 of Koran. Enough time for a war to stop being an event and start being a climate, something you were born into, like weather, like gravity, like the color of your sun. It had produced its own folk songs, its own holidays, its own grammar. In Vethani, there was a verb tense used only for things from before the war, and it was the same tense used for myths. At the center of it all was a wound in space called the ash verge. Once it had been a place. Once it had been the proudest thing either species had ever built. A station the size of a small moon, spun up in the neutral dark between two empires, hung with the banners of both, its docking rings designed so that no ship could arrive first and no ship could arrive last. They had called it a shal meridian, which in the old shared tongue meant asterisk the meeting of shadows, and it had been built for one purpose only, and it had fulfilled that purpose for exactly 11 days. On the 12th day, with the treaty drafted, and the ink drying, and the delegations of both peoples seated at the same long table for the first time in their histories, a shal meridian came apart. It did not explode the way ships explode. Witnesses in the outer picket described something worse, a slow, silent unfolding, like a flower opening in reverse. 40 million tons of station bloomed outward into a cloud of hull and glass and frozen air, and 40,000 people died in the space of 11 seconds. Among them the High Consort of Vethin, the keel mother of the Koran Compact, 600 diplomats, and 200 children brought aboard specifically, so that both peoples could look at each other's young and remember what peace was for. The Vethani said the Koran did it. The Koran said the Vethani did it. Both were certain, both had evidence, both had grief. And the war had been going ever since. The thing about a war that old is that nobody fights it for the reason it started. They fight it for the reasons it continued. Vesenskaya Talon was 19 years old, and she had never once in her life fought for a shal meridian. She had never seen a picture of it that wasn't propaganda. When the fleet chaplain read the names, every morning, all 6,000 they could still verify, cycled in sections so that the whole list took 4 months. She stood at attention in the loading bay with her crest lowered and thought about her hands. She thought about her hands because her hands were the part of her that mattered. She was a loader on the aft dorsal battery of the carrier * solemn answer *, and her hands moved 1,100 kilograms of accelerator slug per hour when the guns were hot, and if her hands were slow, people died, and if her hands were fast, different people died. That was the arithmetic she had been given. That was the whole of it. Her brother had been a loader too. He had been fast. She had a small photograph of him folded into the lining of her glove, which was against regulation, and which every officer on the battery knew about and none had ever mentioned, because every one of them had something folded into something. Talon, the battery chief's voice cracked over the deck comm. Verge patrol reports movement. Koran screen elements 6 maybe 8, stand 2. Kyer stood 2. Her hands found the rail. Around her the great ugly machinery of the solemn answer woke and began to hum, and she thought the thought she thought every single time and would never say out loud. The question of why any of them were still doing this. Not as a protest, just as a fact, the way you might think * it's cold in a room that had always been cold. Her mother had been 19 when she first stood at a rail like this. Her grandmother had been 18. The only honest answer to the question was that they always had, and that answer had killed more people than any weapon either side had ever built. The battle at the verge that day lasted 9 hours and accomplished nothing, which made it a very typical battle. 91 Vethani dead, 104 Koran. A Koran escort broke apart against the drifting bones of a Shal Meridian, spilling its crew into the dark in a spray of emergency pods, and a Vethani destroyer took a hit to its ventral spine and shed a third of its complement into the same cold. And then, as the light of the guns died, both fleets pulled back to their lines to count and bury and begin again. And both sides left the pods where they lay. That was the custom. It had not begun as cruelty. That was the terrible thing about it. In the 11th year of the war, after an armistice attempt collapsed and a rescue convoy was used to smuggle a strike team, both fleets had signed the drift protocols, and the protocols said, "No vessel shall approach the survivors of the enemy. No enemy shall approach ours. Any who does so shall be treated as a combatant, and any survivor taken by the other side is not a guest but a hostage." It had been meant to prevent treachery. Instead, it had built, in the black between two fleets, a place where wounded people went to freeze. They called it the drift. Every battle made a new one. Pods scattered across 100,000 cubic kilometers, each with a beacon, each with air for 40 hours, each with someone inside it who was 19 and had a photograph in a glove. Both fleets retrieved their own. That was allowed. But the fields were vast, and the beacons of the enemy's dying sang on the same frequencies as your own. And so the recovery crews learned to filter them out, to teach their scopes, and their ears, and eventually their hearts, to hear a certain pitch and mark it Natar's asterisk and move on. 214 years, and neither empire had ever won. They had come close twice, and both times, at the moment one fleet stood poised to break the other's line, something had happened. A supply lane had gone unaccountably dry. A jump chart had been found to contain an error. A shipment of accelerator coils had arrived flawed, and the guns that should have ended the war had cracked in their housings. And both times the same neutral, patient, faultlessly polite people had arrived to help sort it out. They were called the Alm Concordium, and they did not fight. They never had. They had no fleet worth the name, a few dozen unarmed couriers, a scattering of relay stations, and a great gleaming hub in deep space called the Hinge, where the jump lanes of 40 systems knotted together and untangled again. What the Concordium had was everything else. They held the charts, licensed and never sold. They held the lane beacons that made faster-than-light travel survivable, maintained under contract, renewable annually. They held the foundries that pressed the accelerator coils both fleets used, because both fleets' own foundries had been bombed to slag in the 5th decade, and neither side had ever quite gotten around to rebuilding them. Because why would you, when the Concordium's coils were so reliable and so reasonably priced? They held the grain and the medicine. They held, in their vast dry vaults, the certified archives of the war itself, because in the 20th year both sides had agreed that a neutral party should keep the record so that neither could falsify it. And they held, above all, the ledger of a Shal. The ledger was the load-bearing beam under 2 centuries of slaughter. When a Shal Meridian died, the Concordium, whose engineers had been the station's contracted maintenance staff, being neutral, being trusted, recovered the station's core recorder from the wreckage. They analyzed it. They certified it, and they released to each side the portion of the record that concerned them. The Vethani were shown proof that a Koran demolition charge had been placed against the station's spine. The Koran were shown proof that a Vethani override code had triggered it. Both records were authentic. Both were notarized. Both were, as far as any expert on either side had ever determined in 214 years, entirely genuine. Neither was true. The Concordium's revenue in the last fiscal cycle had been 41 trillion standard units. 93% of it came from the war. Nobody in the Concordium ever said that out loud. They didn't have to. It was in the walls. It was in the way their accountants apologized when they raised the price of coils, and in Clause 9, ancient, unremarkable, buried in the boilerplate of every Lane contract, which specified that all Concordium holdings in the theater would revert to local sovereignty upon the formal cessation of hostilities. Peace would ruin them. Nobody in that gentle, patient institution would ever have put it so crudely. They simply knew, the way a body knows to keep breathing, that the war was the shape of the world, and that anything which threatened that shape was a thing to be quietly, regretfully, neutrally removed. Into all of this, on the 9th of a month that meant nothing to anyone involved, came a ship. The Vethani picket that logged it first spent 4 minutes arguing about whether to bother reporting it. It was small, barely 200 meters, which in a theater where line ships ran to 4 kilometers was less than a rumor. It was ugly in a way that felt almost deliberate. A blunt, boxy hull that had clearly begun life as an ore hauler, with 3 cargo spines welded to its back like a stack of dishes, and around all of it a patchwork of plating in 9 different colors, some of it salvaged from other ships and simply left in the livery of whoever had owned it before. Its drive signature was thermally inefficient. Its emissions were sloppy. Its transponder broadcast a registry no one had ever heard of, and it moved at a speed that suggested it had never been in a hurry in its life. On the bow, in white paint that had been touched up so many times it stood proud of the metal, someone had painted a bell. Below the bell, in an alphabet the translators had to look up, was a word, Bellwether. "It's a hauler," the picket officer said at last. "Some free trader that got its lane charts wrong, log it and warn it off." They warned it off. The Bellwether acknowledged the warning politely. Its comms officer had a young, tired voice and a habit of saying, "Copy that," and then it did not turn around. It kept coming. On the Bellwether in a compartment that had once been an ore assay bay and was now something between a workshop and a nest, a 19-year-old named Wren Calloway was arguing with a dead machine. The machine was a Coron atmosphere scrubber, 40 years old, pulled 6 weeks ago out of a wreck in a debris field nobody wanted, and it had a fault in its regulator that Wren had been chasing for 3 days with the singular, joyless persistence of someone who has decided that a thing is going to work. She was small and sharp-elbowed, with black hair she'd cut herself badly, and grease worked so far into her knuckles it had become a kind of tattoo. She had a burn scar across the back of one wrist from a coolant line she should have known was live at 15. She wore 3 jackets, all too big, because the assay bay was always cold and because she liked pockets. Wren Calloway had been born on a station and had never lived on a planet, and if you asked her what she did she would say, "I fix things," which was true, and if you pushed her she would get uncomfortable and say, "I read old machines," which was truer and which nobody ever understood. Because that was the thing, Wren didn't just repair salvage, she listened to it. Every machine kept a memory, not a mind, nothing so grand, just a residue. A pump logged its own pressures, a door logged its own openings. A cargo valve, mindlessly, tirelessly for decades, recorded temperature and flow and vibration, because someone somewhere had needed to bill someone else and had wanted to be sure of the number. Machines were full of tiny, boring, honest little diaries that nobody ever read, because nobody wanted to know what a valve had felt. Wren wanted to know. She had wanted to know since she was 8 and had pulled a flight recorder out of a scrapped shuttle and heard, in the dead thing's chatter, the exact moment a pilot she'd never met had realized she was going to make it home. She was, in the polite words of the academy that had declined to keep her, unsuited to structured environments, asked to leave for unauthorized access to archived systems, which meant she had broken into a museum ship's memory core because she wanted to know what it remembered. Her mother had not spoken to her for a year. Her father had helped her pack. And so at 19, Wren Calloway was a junior systems hand on a 200-meter relief hauler at the edge of a war, and the regulator was still broken, and she said, out loud to the scrubber, You're lying to me. She talks to it, said a voice from the hatch. She argues with it, said another. Wren didn't look up. It's lying, it says the flow's clean. The flow is not clean. It's saying what it thinks I want to hear. Marco Reyes, the Bellwether S second pilot, 24 and permanently amused, leaned in the hatchway with his arms folded. Beside him stood a woman with iron-gray hair pulled into a knot so tight it looked structural. Tally Vance, chief engineer, 40 years in engine rooms, hands like a bundle of wire. Machines don't lie, kid, Tally said. Machines lie constantly. They lie when their sensors drift. They lie when someone tells them to. Wren wiped her hands. The trick is that they don't they're lying, so if you catch them at it, they'll show you exactly who taught them. Tally and Marco exchanged a look. It was not a mocking look. It was the look of two people who had, over 11 months, slowly stopped being surprised. Captain wants everyone on the mess deck, Marco said. 10 minutes. I've almost got it. Wren, his amusement dropped away, and that was what made her turn around. We're going into the verge. She wants to say it to everyone's face. The Bellwether S mess deck sat 31 people if they didn't mind touching elbows, and they were all there. They were not soldiers. That was the first thing anyone noticed about them, and the last thing anyone believed. They were relief crew, the ragged, chronically underfunded, mostly volunteer edge of an ordinary species that had come stumbling out of its own small corner of the sky 40 years ago to find the galaxy on fire, and had responded the way humans have always responded to a fire, which is to say badly and stubbornly, and with a bucket. There was Dr. Sunday Ape, chief medical, who had run trauma wards on 3 worlds and had eyes like a closed door. There was Hollies, the cook, who had once fed 400 refugees out of a hold rated for 200. There were 16 medics and mechanics and cargo hands, most under 30, most of them people who had not fit anywhere else. And there was the captain. Inez Adaro was 46 years old, and she had the specific stillness of a person who has already lost the argument with herself. She stood at the head of the mess deck with her hands behind her back and looked at her crew for a long moment before she spoke. "Sephator is starving," she said. Nobody moved. 9 million people. It declared neutrality 40 years ago, and both sides have been punishing it for the crime ever since. The Koran have a picket on the northern lane. The Vethani have one on the southern. Neither will let a relief convoy through, because a relief convoy might be a weapons convoy, and because the Concordium, her mouth did something complicated. The Concordium has very generously offered to broker a humanitarian corridor, and has been offering that for 6 years, and the negotiations are ongoing. How bad? Sunday Ape asked. 400 grams of grain per person per day. It was 600 last year. Adaro's voice did not rise. There are children on that world who have never in their lives been full. Wren, standing at the back with grease on her hands, felt something turn over in her chest. We have 11,000 tons of grain, Adaro said. We have 2,000 tons of medical stores. We have no escort, no charter, no flag anybody respects, and no weapons except a mining laser that Tally swears is decorative. It is not decorative, Tally said. It's just very slow. We have, Adaro went on, one thing that nobody else in this theater has, and I want you to understand what it is before you decide whether to stay on this ship. She looked around the room. We don't have a side. Every ship that has ever tried to help this war has helped one half of it. Every doctor has an oath and a flag, and the flag always wins. Every relief convoy has flown someone's colors, and so every relief convoy has been a legitimate target, and so nothing has ever gotten through. 214 years, and nobody has ever gone in there, and simply refused to choose. Because they get shot, Marco said quietly. Yes, Adaro agreed, probably. She let that sit. Anyone who wants off, we're 4 days from the hinge and I will take you there myself, and there will be no mark against your name and no hard word from me, ever. This is not a test. Nobody moved. Hollies from the galley hatch said, I've already thawed the good stuff for tomorrow. It'd be a waste. And that was how the asterisk Bellwether went into the ash verge. 31 people, 11,000 tons of grain, a bell painted on the bow, and a 19-year-old in the assay bay who was still, quietly, arguing with a machine about what it remembered. They came into the verge 11 hours after a battle. They had not planned it that way. The asterisk Bellwether asterisk had no intelligence, no forward scouts, no access to the tactical net. What it had was a 19-year-old on comms watch with a homemade wideband rig cobbled out of 3 salvaged receivers, and at 3:40 ship's time, Wren Calloway sat straight up in her chair and said, Captain to the bridge. Captain to the bridge asterisk now asterisk. Adaro arrived in a sleep shirt and boots. Listen, Wren said, and put it on the speakers. It was a sound, a soft chorus of overlapping pings, hundreds of them, layered, arrhythmic, some strong and close, and some so faint they were almost the hiss of the universe itself. It filled the bridge like water filling a cup. Emergency beacons, Marco said from the pilot's couch. His voice had gone strange. How many is that? 406. Wren had been counting for 20 minutes with a pen on the back of her hand because her hands needed something to do. 211 are Vethani, 195 are Koran. Nobody said anything. Both fleets have withdrawn. They're 6 hours out sitting on their lines. She swallowed. They took some of their own. The recovery sweep stopped early, the fields too spread and the other fleets too close, and nobody wants to be caught in the open. How long do those pods hold air? Adaro asked. Vethani rate theirs at 40 hours, Koran at 30. Wren's voice was very flat, the way it got when she was holding something down. The oldest beacons in that field have been transmitting for 19 hours. Adaro stood in the middle of her bridge, in a sleep shirt in the dark, and listened to 406 people asking to be found. Tally, she said, how many pods can we take? If we blow the number 2 hold and stack the grain in the passages, and I mean asterisk stack asterisk, I mean people crawl to the head for a month, call it 240, Tally Vance said slowly, if we rack them tight and don't mind that some of them are the wrong shape. Not enough, said Sunday Ape. She had come onto the bridge without anyone noticing, which was a thing she did. We can't treat 240, not properly, not with 11 medics. We don't have to treat them, Adaro said. We have to keep them alive and hand them back. Sunday looked at her for a long moment. Hand them back to whom? Both, Adaro said. The word landed on the bridge like a dropped tool. Inez. Sunday's voice was very careful. If we take Vethani wounded aboard, the Vethani will call it a hostage-taking. That is the actual text of the actual protocol both sides have been signing for 2 centuries. If we take Koran wounded, the Koran will call it the same. If we take both asterisk, we will be, simultaneously, a Vethani prize ship full of Koran hostages and a Koran prize ship full of Vethani hostages. And both fleets will have every justification they have ever needed to blow us out of the sky. And the beautiful thing is that they will each think they're rescuing someone. Yes, Adaro said. Then why? And Adaro said, and Wren would remember this for the rest of her life, would carry it in the lining of her mind the way Kyer Talon carried a photograph in a glove, because they're asterisk cold asterisk, Sunday. Because there are 400 people out there freezing to death in the dark 11 hours from us, and every ship that could reach them is going to let them die because of a rule. And we are the only ship in this whole rotten theater that never signed that rule. Sunday Ape closed her eyes. Prep the hold, she said. I want the number 2 bay sterilized, and I want every hand who can hold a torch on the racking. And Inez, she opened her eyes. We take them in the order we find them. Yes. I mean it, not Vethani first, not Coran first, nearest first, sickest first. I will not have my medics making that choice with a flag in their hands. Sunday, Adaro's voice cracked just slightly on the name. That's the entire point. It took 19 hours. Later, when people told the story, they made it sound like a rescue in a song. It was not. It was Marco Reyes flying a 200-meter or hauler through a debris field at a speed that was frankly obscene, with Wren feeding him beacon vectors as fast as her hands could sort them. It was cargo hands in vacuum suits standing in an open bay with tether lines and grapples, physically catching pods as the ship swept past, because the Bellwether had no rescue arms and never had. It had been built to pick up rocks that did not mind being dropped. It was Hollies the cook, running a winch for 11 straight hours, with a burn on his forearm he never mentioned. It was Wren, at hour 9, finding a beacon pulsing at a rate she didn't recognize and realizing, with a cold drop in her stomach, that it was a Coran cadet pod, because the Coran brought their young aboard at 14 to learn the trade, and shouting the vector at Marco so loudly that she tore something in her throat and spoke in a rasp for a week. It was 238 pods. It was, in the end, 122 Vethani and 116 Coran, not by design, but by who was nearest, and no one on the Bellwether knew the count until it was over, because no one had been keeping one. And it was, at hour 19, 168 beacons still singing in the dark that the Bellwether had no room for, and Inez Adaro standing on her bridge with her hands flat on the console and her head down, listening to them, until Sunday Ape came up behind her and said, very quietly, "The ones we have will die if we stay." And Adaro said, "I know." And they left. Wren went to the assay bay afterward and shook for 20 minutes with her back against the broken scrubber, and did not cry, and then got up and went back to work, because someone had to run the oxygen lines. The number 2 hold was the largest open volume on the ship, 40 meters long, 16 wide, ribbed with the bare structure of a hull built to carry ore and never intended to carry anything that could feel. Sunday Ape turned it into a ward in 6 hours. They cracked the pods open and pulled people out, and the people came out gray and wet and half frozen and screaming, or not screaming, which was worse. They laid them on pallets and on grain sacks, and when the pallets ran out, on the deck plating with a survival blanket underneath and one on top, and they ran heater lines down the rows, and the ward stank of coolant and blood and thawing meat and fear. And they laid them where they fell. That was the decision. Sunday made it in about 4 seconds, standing at the head of the hold with a triage tag in her hand and 238 people coming through the door, and she said, "We are not sorting them." "Doctor," one of her medics started. "We are not sorting them. We do not have the deck space, we do not have the time, and I am not building a wall down the middle of my ward." Sunday's voice was perfectly level. "Nearest bed, sickest first, move." And so a Vethani spinal case came to rest 80 centimeters from a Coran with a crushed thorax. And a Coran cadet, 15 years old, with frostburn over 60% of her body, was laid down beside a Vethani signals officer who had been in the same battle, who had probably been shooting at her. There were, at first, 4 separate incidents. A Vethani gunner with a broken arm came off the pallet swinging when he saw what lay beside him. A Coran deck chief tore out his own oxygen line rather than lie next to that asterisk. One of the Vethani got as far as the hatch and had to be sat down, gently and immovably, by Marco Reyes, who kept saying, "Nobody here is going to hurt anyone." And then at hour 4, the 5th incident happened, and after that there were no more. It was a Koran Keel sergeant named Bosch von Ardel, 20 years old, a gunner, a man with a laugh like a door falling over, though he was not laughing then, who woke on the deck of a human cargo hold with a shattered pelvis and no idea where he was, and turned his head, and saw a Vithani not 2 meters away, and reached with a broken hand for a weapon he did not have. And then saw that the Vithani was a child. She was 17. Her name was Vane. She had lost most of her left arm somewhere between her ship coming apart and her pod's auto-injector finding her, and she was awake, staring at the ceiling with the specific blank horror of someone who has just understood what has happened to her body, and she was making a small sound, not a scream, just a thin, continuous sound, the sound of a person who cannot stop. Bosch von Ardel lay there in the noise, and the stink with his hand out and his enemy beside him. And then he pulled his hand back, and took hold of the edge of her survival blanket which had slipped, and pulled it up over her shoulder because she was shaking, and because he could not reach anything else. The Vithani girl turned her head and looked at him. Neither of them said anything. Neither of them could have. They had no shared language, and the *Bellwether *S translators were 3 decades out of date and mostly used for arguing with cargo brokers. But she stopped making the sound. Wren Calloway saw it from the catwalk above the hold, with a coil of oxygen line over her shoulder, and she stood there a long moment with her mouth open, and then went and did her job, and did not tell anyone about it for a long time, because she did not yet have the words for what she had seen. They kept them for 6 days. 19 died. Sunday Ape wrote all 19 names in her own hand, in her own alphabet, and then, painstakingly in theirs, she made the survivors teach her the characters, and she did not sort that list either. The other 219 lived. They lived on Holly's food, which was mostly a porridge he built out of the relief grain, and which turned out, by pure accident, to be edible to Vithani and tolerable to Koran, and which every person in that hold ate 3 times a day out of the same pot. They learned each other's names. They could not help it. 6 days is a long time to lie 80 centimeters from someone. By the 4th day, a Vithani signals officer was teaching the Koran cadet to count in Vithani, because the cadet was 15 and frightened, and needed something to do with her mind. By the 6th day, Bosch von Ardel knew that Vane had wanted to be a cartographer, and Vane knew that Bosch von Ardel's grandfather had died at this same wreck 40 years ago, and that Bosch had chalked 104 tally marks inside his gun housing, and had stopped counting the day he turned 20, because he had started to feel sick. Neither of them had ever, in their entire lives, been told a single true thing about the other. Wren Calloway understood it on the 5th day, replacing a heater element while a Koran cadet laughed at something a Vithani had said. They had not been lied to about each other's crimes. The crimes were real. 2 centuries of war does not leave anyone clean. They had been lied to about each other's existence. Every Vithani knew with total certainty that the Koran did not grieve. Every Koran knew with total certainty that the Vithani had no young, that they were grown in vats, that they felt nothing. The propaganda was old and simple, and had been repeated so many times that it had stopped being propaganda and become the floor. And it took 80 centimeters of deck plating and 6 days to knock it down. On the 7th day, Inez Adaro brought her ship out of the verge and stopped, exactly halfway between the Vithani line and the Koran line, and opened every channel she had. "This is the independent vessel Bellwether *, she said. "Human registry, unaligned, unarmed. I am carrying 219 of your people, 113 Vithani, 106 Koran. They are alive. 19 are dead. I have their names and their remains, and I will hand them over with honor." She paused. "I want nothing," she said. "I am not asking for payment, safe passage, recognition, or thanks. I am not taking a side. I am telling both of you to send transports, and I am telling both of you that if you fire on this ship, you will be firing on a hold that contains your own children." The silence on the channel lasted 11 minutes. Aboard the solemn answer asterisk, in a loading bay, a 19-year-old named Kyra Talon stood at her rail with her hands frozen on the accelerator slug, and listened to a human woman list, in slow, careful, badly accented Vethani, the names of 113 people who were supposed to be dead. The 41st name was her cousin's. Around her, the loading bay had gone completely still. The battery chief had his hand over his mouth. A gunner 2 racks down had sat down on the deck. And on the great tactical display of the flagship, 400 kilometers away, Fleet Mother Isu Caravane, who had commanded the Vethani Verge fleet for 19 years, who had buried 2 children and a husband in this war, who had a reputation for a temper that could strip paint, stood looking at a small, ugly ship sitting in the middle of the killing ground with its bay doors open and its lights on and a bell painted on its bow. "Ma'am," her tactical officer said, "the Koran are launching transports." "Yes," Caravane said. "Ma'am, do we?" "Launch ours," she said. And then, after a moment, in a voice her tactical officer had never heard from her and never heard again, "Tell them to go slowly. I don't want anyone frightened." The transports came from both directions at once. They arrived within 4 minutes of each other, and for a long, unbearable moment the 2 flights of shuttles, Vethani white, Koran ochre, hung on either side of the asterisk Bellwether asterisk like 2 halves of a held breath, neither willing to dock first, neither willing to pull away. It was Marco Reyes who broke it. He put the floodlights on both bays, opened both doors at the same instant, and said over the open channel in the flattest, most bored voice he could manufacture, "Both sides, you're clear to approach. Mind the paint, it's older than you." They came. And then the strangest hour in the history of the Verge unfolded, and nobody who was there ever entirely got over it. Vethani stretcher-bearers and Koran stretcher-bearers squeezed past each other in a passageway 90 centimeters wide, and they did not fight because they were carrying wounded, and because a human medic with blood on her sleeve stood at the junction directing traffic with a wrench, saying, "Left, left, you 2 wait, thank you, left," and nobody knew what to do about her. In the number 2 hold, a Koran litter team arrived to collect Bosch van Ardel and found him with his hand out, his broken hand, splinted, held out flat, toward a one-armed Vethani girl on the next pallet, who was gripping 2 of his fingers as hard as she could. The litter team stopped. One of them looked up at the human catwalk, where a 19-year-old with grease on her hands watched them with an expression that offered no help whatsoever. They waited. They stood in a war zone and waited until the Vethani girl let go. Imri Vane said something to Bosch. It was 3 words in Vethani, and Bosch van Ardel did not understand any of them, and he nodded anyway. Afterward, when a translator finally got hold of the recording, they found she had said, "Don't chalk anymore." The war did not stop. That was the part Wren had not been ready for. She had thought, standing on that catwalk with her heart in her throat, that this was the moment, that people would see, and something would break open. 9 days later, there was a battle at the Verge that killed 280 people. She sat on the deck of the assay bay and put her forehead on her knees and said, "It didn't matter asterisk." And Tally Vance, who had seen a great many things not matter, sat down on a crate beside her. "The Vethani quarantined their wounded when they got them back," Tally said. "Whole medical wing, sealed off, no contact." She shook her head slowly. "Wren, those 219 people are the most dangerous thing in this theater right now, and both fleets know it, and they've locked them in a room. You don't lock up a thing that doesn't matter." Wren lifted her head. "It landed," Tally said. "It just didn't land where you were looking." The Concordium courier arrived 6 days later, while the Bellwether was taking on water at a neutral depot in the Cepha system. It was a beautiful ship, white, seamless, silent, shaped like a thrown knife, without a single visible weld, a genuine shock to the eye after 11 months of the Bellwether S scarred flanks and the slab-sided warships of the Verge. Factor Orth Sim came aboard with 2 aides and a folding table. He was a slight, gray-mantled being, the Concordium's factor for the Verge Theater for 31 years, and he considered himself, without irony, a man of peace. He was extraordinarily polite. He complimented the ship in a way that let you know he had noticed exactly how bad it was and was choosing, generously, not to say so. He sat in the Bellwether S mess with his gray mantle arranged around him and accepted a cup of Holly's coffee and did not drink it. Captain Adaro, on behalf of the Concordium, I want to say sincerely, personally, that what your crew did at the Verge was one of the most humane acts this theater has seen in 2 centuries. Thank you, Adaro said. It was also, he said gently, extremely dangerous, and I don't only mean to you. Sim folded his long fingers. Every rule in this war is a scar, Captain. When you cut one open, even for the best reason in the world, you should expect it to bleed. Wren, who was refilling the coffee urn because she had volunteered specifically, so she could stand in the room, watched Adaro's face and saw absolutely nothing on it. What do you want, Factor? To help you, he said, and he sounded like he meant it, and the horror of it was that he did. You are carrying 11,000 tons of grain for Cepha. The Concordium has been working for 6 years to open a humanitarian corridor to that world, and I will tell you honestly, Captain, we are close, closer than we have ever been. 6 years, Adaro said. 6 years and 400 negotiating sessions. It is agonizing. But it is working, and the thing that could destroy it, the single thing that could set us back a decade, is a rogue vessel with no flag running that blockade and getting itself killed. And if we get through, then you will have fed 9 million people for 11 days, Sim said, and you will have proved to both fleets that the corridor is a security risk, and the negotiations will collapse, and Cepha will be blockaded for another 20 years. He spread his hands. I am not threatening you, Captain. I am begging you. There are people in this galaxy trying to build a road. Please do not drive across the wet concrete. It was, Wren thought, an extraordinarily good argument, the best she had ever heard. She spent a long time afterward trying to work out how something so reasonable could be so completely, structurally rotten, and the answer took her 3 weeks and a dead machine to find. We'll consider it, Adaro said. That's all I ask. Sim rose. His aides folded the table. At the hatch he paused and turned and said as an afterthought, as a kindness, your salvage, the core unscrubber, the hull sections. You're pulling from the Verge fields, yes. Some. The Concordium buys Verge salvage, Sim said. All grades, well above market. It's part of our custodial mandate. The Meridian wreck is a grave, and we prefer it not be picked over by profiteers. Civilian hulls especially. Any pre-war civilian hull in any condition will take at 4 times its metal value. He inclined his head. Consider it. It would pay your fuel. And he left. Wren stood in the empty mess for a long time after the courier undocked. Then she went and found Tally Vance in the engine room and said, why would anyone pay 4 times metal value for a civilian hull? Tally didn't look up from the coolant manifold. Because he's rich and sentimental. He isn't sentimental. He didn't drink the coffee. Wren was pacing, which she did when her brain got loud. Metal is metal. A civilian hull is worse metal, thin, alloyed for cost, full of composite you have to separate out. Nobody pays a premium for bad metal. A military hull, sure, that's dense stuff. But he specifically said *civilian*. He specifically said any condition asterisk. So he isn't buying metal. He's buying hulls asterisk. He wants the hulls off the field. Wren was pacing faster. 214 years, and the richest institution in this theater has been quietly buying every worthless civilian wreck out of one specific debris field for 4 times what it's worth, and nobody has ever asked why, because it's a asterisk good deed. It's custodial. It's a asterisk grave asterisk tally, and they're asterisk tidying asterisk it. Tally set her wrench down very slowly. Kid, don't. They're not tidying it. They're emptying asterisk it. She went to the captain with it that night, and Inez Adaro listened all the way through without interrupting, which was the thing Wren loved most about her. Then Adaro said, 9 million people are eating 400 grams a day. I know. Cephalotor first, Adaro said, then your ghosts. She looked at Wren for a moment longer. Write it down, everything you just told me, date it, put it in the log. Why? Because if I'm wrong about the blockade, Adaro said, somebody's going to salvage this ship, and somebody's going to read that log, and they should know what we were thinking. They ran the Cephalotor blockade at 600 on a Tuesday, with every light on the hull burning. That was Wren's idea, though Adaro claimed it afterward and Wren let her. The asterisk Bellwether did not go dark. It did not run cold. It did not try to slip the picket lines, because everyone knew a stealth run would end in the obvious way. Instead, the asterisk Bellwether asterisk lit up like a festival, running lights, cargo floods, docking beacons, the mining lasers targeting lamp, the interior lights of every compartment with the shutters open, and it came down the southern lane at a stately, unhurried, absolutely unmistakable 11% of maximum burn. And it talked. This is the independent vessel asterisk Bellwether asterisk, Wren said, over every channel on every band, in Vethani and in Koran and in the trade tongue, reading from a script that Adaro had written and that she had rewritten twice because it was too polite. Our manifest is as follows. Number 1, hold, 3,100 tons of hard wheat. Number 2, hold, 2,900 tons of hard wheat. Number 3, hold, 4,200 tons of milled flour, 800 tons of protein concentrate, and 140 tons of infant formula. Spine racks, 2,000 tons of medical stores, itemized as follows. She read the itemization, all of it. It took 19 minutes, and it included 240 units of Vethani-compatible plasma and 240 units of Koran-compatible plasma. Why are we carrying those? Marco had asked 3 weeks ago in the depot. Because someday somebody's going to need them, Sunday Ape had said, and I'd rather be the fool who bought them. And we are carrying no weapons. Our only offensive system is a Class 2 mining laser rated for rock. It is powered down and its capacitor is drained, and you may confirm that with any scan you like at any range you like. We are not aligned. We are not chartered. We are not carrying passengers, intelligence, or ordnance for either fleet. We are not going to stop. We are not going to turn. We are going to Cephalotor, and we are going to unload 11,000 tons of food onto a world where children have never been full, and then we are going to leave. You may board us. We will open every hatch, unlock every hold, and stand aside, and we will not resist you in any way, and we ask only that you do it quickly, because there are people down there who are hungry. You may fire on us. We will not return fire. We have no way to return fire. We are broadcasting on every band, unencrypted, and it is being heard by every ship in this system and by the civilian net on Cephalotor, which means 9 million people are listening to this right now, and so is your fleet, and so is theirs. This is the independent vessel asterisk Bellwether asterisk. We are carrying bread. Please decide what you are. And then she said it again, and again, on a loop, for 6 hours as the ship came down the lane at 11% burn with every light burning, straight through the Vethani southern picket. Aboard the picket flagship grave of Salt Asterisk, Sub-Commander Enarel had firing solutions on the human ship for 4 hours and 20 minutes and did not use them. She was not a sentimental person. She had executed the standing order on blockade runners 11 times in 6 years without losing a night's sleep, because a blockade runner is a smuggler, and a smuggler in a war zone is a soldier who has not been caught yet. But those 11 ships had all run dark. This one was reading its shopping list. "Ma'am," her gunnery officer's voice was strained. "If we're going to do it, we do it in the next 11 minutes or they're inside the atmosphere envelope and we're firing at a planet." "Read me the order," Enarel said. "Ma'am." "You want to shoot? Fine, read it, out loud on the bridge in front of everyone." She turned in her chair. "Because I have read it, Lieutenant, and it authorizes the destruction of vessels attempting to breach the interdiction by deception or force asterisk. And that ship has spent 4 hours telling us the exact mass of every sack of flour it carries. Find me the deception and I will pull the trigger myself." The bridge was silent. 9 million people are listening to that broadcast, Rel said. So are our own crews, so are the Koran. She looked back at the small, bright, stubborn thing crawling down her lane with its lights on. "In 10 minutes, one of the 2 fleets in this system is going to shoot a bread ship on an open channel, and whichever one does it will have to explain that to their own children." She keyed her comm. "Hold fire, all elements hold fire. Log it as my order, my name, my responsibility." A pause. "And somebody get me the Koran picket commander. If we are both going to be cowards today, I want it on the record that we did it at the same time." The missile came at 11:40, out of empty space, from a bearing that made no sense. It was an excellent missile, a Koran-patterned Sever-class anti-hull weapon, ochre-cased, running a Koran guidance profile, broadcasting a Koran ordnance transponder, and it came in fast and low on a terminal vector that would have put it through the asterisk Bellwether asterisk S number 2 hold. Aboard the solemn answer asterisk, Vesant's Kyer Talon was not at her rail. She had been pulled off the battery 3 days earlier and reassigned to sensor loading, a punishment posting, for a question she should not have asked out loud, and so at 11:40 she was sitting in a dim compartment watching a threat board she was not qualified to interpret, and she saw the launch. Not the missile, the launch asterisk. A tiny, brief, ugly flare of thermal bloom, 41,000 kilometers off the asterisk Bellwether asterisk S starboard quarter, in a patch of space where the Vethani picket showed nothing and the Koran picket showed nothing, and the plot showed only a Concordium lane beacon. One of the little unmanned relay buoys that hung along every jump lane in the theater, maintained under contract, renewable annually, utterly invisible to anybody who had ever looked at anything. She had watched 10,000 launches. She knew what a Koran tube looked like when it fired, and she knew, in the specific animal way that a person knows the shape of the thing that has been trying to kill them since childhood, that the flare she had just seen had not come from a warship. It had come from the beacon. "Sir, launch Bloom, bearing 221 Mark 9, sir. That's the asterisk lane buoy." The watch officer did not look up. "Buoys don't launch Talon." "Sir, I saw asterisk." But it was on the board for 4 seconds, and then the Concordium's telemetry feed, which every ship in the theater used, because the Concordium maintained the beacons, and the beacons were the sensor net in the deep lanes, resolved the track, cleanly and helpfully and instantly, as a Koran Sever class launched from the Koran northern picket. The board redrew itself, the bloom vanished, the vector shifted 11 degrees. Kyer Talon sat in a dim compartment and watched a lie happen in front of her, in real time, in 4 seconds, and nobody else in the room even blinked. On the asterisk Bellwether asterisk, Marco Reyes had 6 seconds. He used 4 of them to say a word the translators declined to render, and the other 2 to do the only thing a 200-meter ore hauler can do about an anti-hull missile, which is to be somewhere else in a very undignified manner. The asterisk Bellwether rolled, harder than its spine was rated for, harder than Tally Vance had ever let it roll in 11 years, and 11,000 tons of grain shifted in its holds with a sound like a mountain clearing its throat. And the missile, which had been aimed at a ship traveling in a straight line at 11% burn, because that ship had promised it would not turn, and had been believed passed through the space where the number 2 hold had been, and took the number 3 cargo spine off at the root. 4,200 tons of milled flour, 800 tons of protein concentrate, and 140 tons of infant formula went into the dark in a slow white blizzard. The asterisk Bellwether did not stop. It came out of the roll-venting atmosphere from 3 compartments, with Tally Vance in the number 3 passage in a vac suit, welding a bulkhead shut by hand with her own crew still on the wrong side of it, screaming at them to asterisk move, 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 and they made it, all but one, and his name was Petro Vasquez, and he was 26, and he had been trying to close a valve. And on the open channel over the sound of alarms, Wren Calloway's voice, raw, cracked, 19 years old, said, "This is the asterisk Bellwether asterisk. We have been struck. We have lost the number 3 spine, 4,200 tons of flour and 140 tons of infant formula. We have 1 crewman dead. His name was Petro Vasquez. He was from Ceres. We are not stopping. We still have 6,000 tons of wheat and 2,000 tons of medicine, and we are 11 hours from Cephator, and we are still coming. We are not going to accuse anyone. We don't know who fired. We are simply going to keep reading our manifest until we get there." And she did. She sat in a chair on a wrecked bridge with her hands shaking so hard she had to hold the console, and she read the remaining manifest, item by item, for 11 hours, in 3 languages on every band, while the ship bled. 9 million people on Cephator listened to a 19-year-old human count sacks of wheat. So did both fleets. They landed the asterisk Bellwether asterisk on Cephator because they could not land it anywhere else. The ship was too broken to shuttle cargo, and so Marco Reyes brought 200 meters of ore hauler down through an atmosphere it had never been designed to survive, onto a dry lake bed outside a city of 400,000, with the hull glowing and every alarm screaming, and Tally Vance in the engine room holding a fuel line closed with a clamp in her own hands. Half the city walked out to meet them. There is a recording of the moment the ramp came down, and it has been watched more times than anything else in the history of the theater. It shows a battered gray ship on a lake bed, steaming, ticking, its back broken. It shows Inez Adaro, filthy, walking down that ramp into a crowd of hungry strangers, stopping halfway and simply pointing back up at the holds. And it shows the crowd going asterisk around asterisk her, up the ramp, into the ship, and beginning, without a word from anybody, to carry the grain out themselves. They unloaded 6,000 tons of wheat by hand in 14 hours. There is a shot, 9 hours in, of a Cephator grandmother with a 50-kilo sack on her back walking past a 19-year-old human girl, sitting on the ramp with her head in her hands, and stopping, and putting one hand on that girl's hair for a moment, and moving on. The Concordium statement was issued the following day. It was a masterpiece. It expressed profound sorrow at the loss of life aboard the human vessel. It noted, with regret, that preliminary telemetry from Concordium Lane beacons indicated the weapon had been of Coron manufacture, but cautioned against premature conclusions. It reiterated that the Concordium had warned the asterisk Bellwether against this exact course of action. It offered, at no charge, to repair the ship at the hinge. And it announced, in the final paragraph, that in light of increased hazard in the theater, Concordium Lane licensing fees for both belligerent fleets would be adjusted upward by 4%. Wren read it 3 times and then went and was quietly sick. They did not go to the hinge. They limped instead, 11 days of it, on one drive and a prayer, back to the one place nobody would look for them, because nobody ever went there except to kill each other, and because it held enough metal debris to hide 100 ships from any sensor ever built. The ash verge. They needed hull plate, a scrubber assembly, a coolant manifold, 40 meters of high-pressure line, and about 9 tons of anything that could be welded to anything else. They needed, in short, to become scavengers, and there were 400,000 tons of dead ship drifting in the verge, and Wren Calloway had spent her whole life learning to read the bones of dead ships. Civilian hulls, she said on the second day in the assay bay to nobody, any condition. 4 times metal. Tally Welding said, "Kid." He named the field. He named the asterisk class asterisk. He wasn't buying salvage, Tally, he was asterisk shopping. Wren had the Verge survey up on 3 screens, 200 years of catalog data, most of it Concordium compiled, which she had started to find very interesting indeed. The official wreck registry, 2,411 objects in the Meridian field, 1,100 military, 1,300 structural, and 106 listed as asterisk pre-incident civilian auxiliary asterisk. Meaning, the little ships, the ones that were docked at a shall Meridian when it died, tenders, water haulers, supply tugs. Wren's voice had gone very quiet. Of those 106, 98 carry a Concordium acquisition stamp. Recovered and disposed of for custodial reasons over 2 centuries, 2 or 3 a decade. Nobody would ever notice. Tally set down her torch. 8 left, Wren said. There are 8 left in this field, and they've been hunting them for 200 years. It took her 19 days to find one. 19 days of crawling the verge in the asterisk Bellwether asterisk S battered work skiff, with Marco flying and Wren hanging in the open hatch with a hand lamp, going object by object through a catalog 2 centuries old, while behind them Tally welded their ship back together out of the bones of warships. Everyone else thought she was chasing ghosts. Marco flew and made jokes and never once complained, and Wren never forgot it. On the 19th day, in the outer scatter of the field, in a region the catalog described as asterisk low-value dispersal, which is what you call the place where the small things went when the big thing broke, the lamp caught a shape. It was tiny, maybe 40 meters, a squat, blunt, unlovely thing with a spherical tank slung under a spine, tumbling slowly, end over end, the way it had been tumbling since before Wren's species had left its own atmosphere. It was a water tender, Coron built, Vethani registered, because that was what a shall Meridian had been, a place where such a thing was briefly possible, and painted once in a cheerful ochre that had been sandblasted to bare metal on the leading face and was still, on the sheltered side, bright as the day it was applied. There was a name on it. The translator took a long moment. Little Kettle. Marco, Wren said. Her voice did not sound like her own. Bring us alongside. The asterisk Little Kettle had been a water hauler for a station full of people who needed 30 million liters a day. That was all it had ever been. No weapons, no armor, no secrets, no cargo but water. It had been clamped to a shall Meridian's ventral service ring for 11 days, feeding the station's tanks through a hard line, and it had been cast off, automatically, by a docking clamp that failed safe when it lost power, about 1.5 seconds before the station came apart. The expanding shell of debris had swatted it out into the dark like a hand brushing away a fly, and it had been tumbling ever since. Its crew of 4 had died in the first minute. Their remains were still aboard. Wren found them and did not photograph them and did not touch them, and later made very sure that they were buried. And in the tender's aft equipment bay, bolted to a bulkhead, coated in 2 centuries of dust, was a box. It was the most boring box in the galaxy. A mass flow ledger, a billing computer. It existed for one reason, to record, with legal rigor, exactly how many liters of water had passed through the hard line, at what pressure, at what temperature, at what time, so that the station's water authority could be invoiced and any dispute settled by an arbitrator. It was sealed. It was armored not against war, but against asterisk tampering, because the whole point of a billing recorder is that nobody can lie to it. It had its own power cell, rated for 300 years because water disputes could take a long time. And it had been clamped, physically, mechanically, to the hull of a Shao Meridian for 11 days. Which meant that for 11 days, and for about 11 seconds afterward, it had been listening to the station through the metal. Wren Calloway sat on the deck of a dead ship in a vacuum suit with a 200-year-old billing computer in her lap, and heard her own blood in her ears. Everyone was looking for the station's recorder, she said out loud to nobody. The black box. They fought over it for 2 centuries, and the Concordium had asterisked it, and the Concordium certified asterisked it, and everybody believed the Concordium because the Concordium is asterisk neutral. She turned the box over in her hands. Nobody looked in the plumbing. It took her 11 days to read it. The ledger did not want to be read. Its interfaces were dead standards, its power cell had drifted, its clock had drifted, and the first 3 attempts produced nothing but a scroll of corrupted flow values. But it was not encrypted. That was the beautiful, stupid, saving thing. Nobody encrypts a water bill. And Wren Calloway had spent her entire life learning to listen to the boring memories of boring machines. She rebuilt the interface out of parts from a Coron scrubber. She recalibrated the clock against the star field. And on the 11th day, in the assay bay of a broken human ship, with Tally and Adaro and Sunday and Marco standing behind her because word had gotten around and nobody could stay away, she brought up the record of the last 11 days of a Shao Meridian. At first it was exactly what it should have been. Flow, pressure, temperature. A station drinking 30 million liters a day. The morning surge, the evening surge, the pulse of 40,000 people living. There, Wren said. There what? Hull vibration, channel 6. The ledger logs it because water hammer damages the line, so it needs to know when the hull moves. She pulled the trace up. That baseline is the station. 40,000 people walking around, and the ventilation and the docking rings turning. Now watch. She scrubbed forward, day 10, day 11. And on the morning of the 12th day, 4 hours and 11 minutes before a Shao Meridian died, a new signature appeared on channel 6. A rhythmic, mechanical, deliberate vibration, moving slowly along the hull, pausing, moving again. That, Wren said, is something crawling on the outside of the station. Nobody breathed. It moves 11 meters. It stops for 4 minutes. It moves 11 meters. It stops for 4 minutes. She traced it with her finger. 11 meters is the frame spacing of the ventral spine. Whatever that is, it is walking down the asterisk spine asterisk, frame by frame, stopping at each one and doing something. Placing charges, Adaro said. 19 of them. It stopped 19 times. She scrubbed forward again. And here's the docking log. The ledger logs every clamp cycle on the hard line because if the line's uncoupled you can't bill for the water. 90 minutes before the crawler starts, something docked at the tender's asterisk-own asterisk service clamp. Small, 4 tons. It stayed 40 minutes and left. Whose? Said Sunday Ape. The clamp is a asterisk smart asterisk clamp, Wren said. It reads the transponder of whatever attaches to it. It has to. That's how it knows who to bill. She turned the screen around. There was a single line of text on it. It was a registry code, in a format that had not been used in 200 years, and beneath it the ledger's own translation, printed as it had been printed 10,000 times before that day, for 10,000 routine deliveries of nothing in particular. AUMCONCORDIUM, custodial maintenance, Vessel 9 hinge registry. Inspection visit, no charge. They sat with it for 2 days. If we send this to the Vethani, Adaro said, in the assay bay with her hands flat on the table and her eyes closed, they will believe it and they will use it. They will say, the Koran were innocent and so were we, and we have both been played, and now we will take the hinge and hold the lanes and dictate terms. And the Koran will not believe them, because it will have come from Vethani mouths. It will become the reason for the next 100 years. And if we send it to the Koran, Marco said. Same mirror image. So we send it to both, said Wren. Simultaneously, which means every relay in this theater, which means the lane beacons, her mouth twisted, which the Concordium owns. They'll jam it, said Tally. They'll jam it, and then they'll certify a version that says something else, and they'll do it within the hour because they have been doing exactly that for 214 years. Adaro opened her eyes. A recording is not proof. Not here. Everything in this theater is a recording and everything has been forged. The ledger of a shall is a forgery, and it is the most authenticated document in the galaxy. Wren stared at the table. Then we don't send a recording, she said slowly. They looked at her. You can't jam an object, Wren said. You can't forge 40 tons of hull. The kettle has crawlers scoring down its flank, where the thing walked over it to reach the station. It has a clamp with a Concordium matelock burned into the contacts. It has the bodies of 4 water haulers still aboard Asterisk, and any coroner on either side can date them and name them, because the Vethani have kept the names of the Meridian dead for 214 years, and those 4 names are on the list. She looked up. We don't transmit anything. We bring it to them. We put it in the middle and we let them come and touch it, both of them, at the same time. Standing next to each other. They'll never agree to meet, Sunday said. They don't have to agree, Wren said. There's 1 day a year when they're already there. The Day of Names fell on the 4th of the Vethani month of Ash, and it was the most sacred day in either calendar, and it had been observed for 214 years in the only way 2 peoples who hate each other know how to observe anything. They fought. Both fleets came to the verge on the anniversary of the Meridian's death. Both read their dead aloud. Both, at the reading's end, went to their guns, because to withdraw would dishonor the names, and because the other fleet was there. It was the bloodiest engagement of every year. It had never gained either side anything, and neither side could stop coming. The Asterisk Bellwether got there first. They came in on the morning of the 4th with a welded-over back and a stump where the number 3 spine had been, towing on a 40-meter cable a small, blunt, ochre and bare metal water tender with 4 dead crew and a billing computer aboard. They parked in the exact center of the field, at the coordinates where a shall meridian had hung, in the middle of the drifting bones of it, and they lit every light they had, and they waited. The fleets arrived 4 hours apart, as they always did. 211 Vethani warships to the coreward side, 194 Koran keels to the rimward. And between them, a 200-meter ore hauler with a bell on its bow. Bellwether Asterisk, this is Vethani Verge Command. Fleet Mother Isu Caravane's voice was flat and hard. You are in the fire zone. Withdraw. Bellwether Asterisk, this is First Keel Draven Tavash of the Koran Compact. Move, human. Not today. Today we do not care what you are carrying. Inez Adaro looked around her bridge, at Marco, at Tally, at Sunday, at a 19-year-old with grease on her hands and a 200-year-old water bill in her lap, and keyed the open channel. No, she said. And then Wren Calloway began to talk. She talked for 40 minutes. She did not accuse. Adaro had been very clear about that, and Wren had understood it in her bones. The moment you accuse, you become a side, and the moment you become a side, half the galaxy stops listening. So she did not accuse, she described. She described a water tender called the Little Kettle and its crew of 4, and she read their names, 2 Coron, 2 Vethani, crewing the same small ship in the 11 days when such a thing was briefly possible. And she noted, without comment, that all 4 names appeared on both fleets' lists of the Meridian dead. She described a billing computer that could not be encrypted or falsified, because its entire legal purpose was to be believed by people who hated each other. She described a vibration on Channel 6, something that crawled 11 meters and stopped for 4 minutes, 19 times, along the ventral spine of a station full of children. She described a docking clamp and what a smart clamp does and why. And then she said, "I'm not going to tell you what this means. I am 19 years old and I fix machines and I am nobody, and if I tell you what it means, you will decide whether to believe me, and that is not what should happen here." The Little Kettle is on a cable 40 meters behind the ship. It is not transmitting. There is nothing to jam and nothing to forge. It is an object, and it has been drifting out here for 214 years, and everyone who ever came to this graveyard came looking for weapons, and nobody ever looked at the plumbing. So send someone, send a coroner, send an engineer, send your most suspicious officer, the one who trusts nothing, the one who has hated the other side longest. Search that ship however you like. No human will be aboard it. But send them at the same time, both of you, together, because if only one of you looks, the other will never believe it, and then it will all have been for nothing. And there is a 15-year-old Coron cadet who taught herself to count in Vethani on the deck of my ship, and I would like her to have a life. That's all. This is the Bellwether We're standing here. We're not moving. We're not armed. Come and look. The silence went on for 26 minutes. Aboard the solemn answer in a dim sensor compartment, Vessen's Talon stood up so fast she knocked her chair over. She had been carrying it for 11 weeks. The launch bloom, the buoy, the 4 seconds in which a lie had happened in front of her while a room full of grown soldiers looked at it and saw nothing. She had told her watch officer. She had told the chaplain. She had told her battery chief, who had looked at her a long time and then said, "Kyre, let it go." And now a human girl her own age was talking about a docking clamp, and Kyre Talon found that she was running. She got as far as the flag deck before anyone stopped her, and she was shouting by then, and there were 2 masters-at-arms with their hands on her, and Fleet Mother Isu Caravane turned around on her own bridge to see a 19-year-old loader with a torn sleeve and a photograph in her glove screaming that the lane beacons could shoot. There is no record of what Caravane said next. There is only what she did, which was to hold up one hand, stop the masters-at-arms, and say, "Let her speak." The Concordium moved at 1417. Factor Orth Sim did not think of it as an attack. He was not a man who used that word. He thought of it as containment and he authorized it with genuine sorrow, and he was careful to specify that the human vessel and its tow were to be neutralized as cleanly as possible. The lane beacons in the Verge, 11 of them, maintained under contract, renewable annually on station for 2 centuries, opened their maintenance shrouds. They were not beacons. They had never been beacons. They were weapons platforms, compact, cold, silent, sitting in the middle of a war zone with a neutral transponder and a maintenance schedule, invisible to a sensor net that they themselves were And they performed their other function first. They blanketed the Verge in a jamming field so total that 400 warships went instantly deaf and blind, seeing only what the Concordium's telemetry chose to show them. Which was this: the human vessel Bellwether at the center of the field powering up a weapon. Wren watched the Bellwether tactical board go white and then repaint itself with a lie, and she started to laugh, and then stopped, because she understood. "They're not going to kill us," she said. "They're going to make them kill us, and then they'll certify the recording." "How long do we have?" Adaro asked. "Both fleets have firing solutions on us, and their boards say we just charged a gun." Wren's hands were flying. "Seconds." "Wren," Adaro's voice was calm. "Can you break the jamming?" "No." Wren looked up and her face was white and she was smiling in a way that frightened Marco Reyes for the rest of his life. "But I don't have to. They jammed the net the beacons, the relays, the tactical feed." She slammed her hand down on the wideband rig she had built out of scrap when she was 17 because she liked listening to old machines. "They didn't jam light asterisk." She threw every floodlight, running light, docking lamp, targeting lamp, and interior lamp. The Bellwether had onto the hull of the little kettle 40 meters behind them, and she pulsed them. Not a signal, not a code, not anything that needed a receiver or a relay or a translation or a Concordium license. She simply lit up the evidence in the middle of 2 fleets, so that 400 ships full of people with eyes could look out their windows and see a small ochre water hauler hanging in the dark, brilliant as a lantern, with 19 scorch marks walked down its flank and a Concordium clamp mated to its hull. And on every band she had, into the roar of the jamming, in a voice cracked from 11 hours of reading a manifest. "Look out the window." Aboard the HFY, a gunner named Bosch van Ardel, whose gun housing had 104 tally marks in it and no more, stood at his port with a firing solution locked on a human ship and his hand on the release. He looked out the window. Aboard the solemn answer Fleet Mother Isu Caravane, with a 19-year-old loader still standing on her flag deck between 2 masters-at-arms, was looking at a board that told her the humans had armed a weapon. She walked to the viewport instead. She looked out at the graveyard of a Shal Meridian, where she had come every year for 19 years to read the names of her dead, and she saw a battered human ship holding station in the middle of the field with all its lights blazing, and behind it, lit like something on an altar, a little water tender with scorch marks on its spine. And then she saw the shrouds come off the beacons. "Ma'am," her tactical officer said, in a voice that had stopped working properly, the lane buoys have tracks." The 11 Concordium platforms fired, with the cold professional efficiency of an institution that had spent 214 years perfecting the art of removing things that threatened the shape of the world. And 2 fleets, for the first time in the history of either species, moved in the same direction at the same time. Nobody ordered it. That is the part the historians argue about, and they will argue about it forever because the truth is unsatisfying. Nobody ordered it. The Vethani destroyer Grief of Winter burned its lateral thrusters and put 4 kilometers of armored hull between the incoming fire and a human ore hauler, and its captain said later that she did not remember making the decision. The Coron heavy keel HFY came about on full burn and shielded the tow line, and its point defense grid, hundreds of small fast guns, built and crewed for the sole purpose of killing Vethani ordnance, began, for the first time, to shoot at something else. An aft dorsal battery on the solemn answer went hot, and Kyr Talon was not there, because she was standing on a flag deck, but her crew was, and they fired in the same direction as the Coron for the first time in 11 generations, and the 2 streams of fire crossed in the dark and did not touch each other, and both of them ended at the same place. 3 Concordium platforms were destroyed in the first 11 seconds. And then First Keel Draven Tavash's voice came over the open channel, which was suddenly, wonderfully, screamingly clear, because a jamming array is a fragile thing, and there were now 400 warships in the field with a common bearing, and what he said was, "Kels cold, all keels cold asterisk. Do not destroy them. On 400 bridges, gunners' hands hesitated. "Disable and board," said Draven Tavesh, who was 71 and had spent his entire life killing Vethani. "Take the platforms whole, take the crew's asterisk alive, take their memory cores intact." His voice shook very slightly and every ship in the theater heard it. "They will answer for this. They will not burn for it. If we burn them, we will never know, and I have waited my whole life to asterisk no asterisk." And Isu Caravane on the coreward line said into the same channel, "Vethani elements will comply with the Koran order." She never explained why, and nobody ever asked her, and the sentence is carved now on the wall of a building that did not exist when she said it. It took 6 hours. The 11 platforms were disabled, boarded and taken. Their crews, Concordium technicians, most of them young, most of them appalled, surrendered without a shot on 8 of the 11. On the other 3 there was a brief, ugly fight that killed 9 people, and that was the end of the killing. The memory cores came out whole. 31 hours later, a combined Vethani and Koran boarding force reached the hinge and found the Concordium's directors in their council chamber, with the archive doors sealed and a purge running. They were too late to stop it, and it did not matter, because the Concordium had spent 2 centuries being the most meticulous record keepers in the galaxy, and they had notarized everything asterisk, and 40 systems worth of certified archives sat in escrow in vaults the Concordium itself had built to be tamper-proof. They had made themselves unfalsifiable. It was their great achievement. It took 11 weeks to read it all, Vethani and Koran archivists working at the same tables, and the thing they found at the bottom of it was not a conspiracy of monsters. It was a memo. It was 214 years old, written by an assistant director of Lane licensing, and it was 3 paragraphs long. It observed, dryly, in the language of accountancy, that the projected cessation of hostilities would trigger Clause 9 of the Standard Lane Agreement, resulting in reversion of all Concordium holdings to local sovereignty, at an estimated loss of 93% of gross revenue. It noted that the maintenance contract for Ashal Meridian was held by the Concordium, and it recommended a course of action, and the recommendation was approved by 4 signatures, and the 4 names were on a polished wall in the Hall of Founders, where schoolchildren had been taken on tour. 40,000 people had died on a station full of children because a licensing agreement had a clause in it. 214 years of war, 11 generations. Something on the order of 40 million dead, though the number was never agreed on, because the Concordium had certified the casualty lists too. For a clause. The war did not end that day. Wars that old do not end in a day. But it stopped. The shooting stopped on the 4th of Ash and never resumed. The armistice was signed 9 weeks later in the Verge, aboard nothing at all. Both delegations came out in suits and stood on the drifting spine of Ashal Meridian itself, in the vacuum, among the bones of the thing they had both been mourning, because neither would board the other's ship, and there was no neutral station left in the galaxy that anyone trusted. They signed a paper on the wreck and could not shake hands because of the gloves, and so First Keel Draven Tavesh reached out and put his palm flat against Fleet Mother Isu Caravane's palm, and held it there, and neither of them moved for a long time. And then they read the names. All of them, every name from the Meridian, and then, because someone suggested it and nobody could think of a reason to say no, every name from the 214 years afterward. Both sides, one list, unsorted. It took 9 years to read, and they are still reading it. There is a chamber on Cephator, chosen because Cephator had refused to pick a side and had starved 40 years for it, where the reading goes on continuously, in shifts, one name at a time, day and night. When they reach the end of the list, they go back to the beginning. The 4 crew of the asterisk Little Kettle are read together, in the order in which they served, which is how the asterisk Bellwether asterisk S log had them. The asterisk Bellwether asterisk was not at the signing. She was 3 systems away, with a welded-over back and a stump where her third cargo spine had been, hauling 1,100 tons of seed grain to a world that had asked for it. Both fleets had offered them everything: shipyards, refits, a new hull, an escort of honor, a seat at the table, medals, a homeworld, money in quantities that had stopped meaning anything. Inez Adaro said no to all of it politely, in a message 11 lines long, and the only things she accepted were a replacement scrubber assembly and the fuel to reach the next port. Why? Wren asked her on the bridge on the night after. And Adaro, exhausted, watching the stars, said, "Because the moment we take something from them, we've picked a side, and the only reason any of this worked is that we never did." She thought about it a moment longer. "They don't need us to be heroes," she said. "They've had heroes for 200 years and look what it got them. They need us to be boring. They need a ship that shows up with grain and doesn't want anything. If we can be that for 50 years, they'll build the rest themselves." The story grew the way stories grow, but the truest tellings came from the 219, from a Coran keel sergeant with a rebuilt pelvis who could not stop talking about a human cook and a pot of porridge, and from a one-armed Vethani cartographer named Sel Imri Vane, who drew the first joint star charts of the reunified lanes and kept on her desk a survival blanket she had never given back, and from a Vethani loader named Kyr Talon, who was 19 when she ran onto a flag deck screaming about a lane buoy, and who was 31 when she took her seat as the first Vethani member of the Joint Lane Authority, and who said, at her confirmation, the sentence that ended up on a coin: "The war did not end because someone was strong enough to stop it. It ended because someone was strange enough to look somewhere else." On Cephator, they did not tell it as a war story at all. On Cephator, they told it as a story about bread. Wren Calloway was 20 by then. She had a new scar on her wrist to go with the old one, and she still cut her own hair badly, and she still wore 3 jackets because the assay bay was always cold. She had turned down a professorship, 2 knighthoods, a Coran keel name, and an honorary Vethani rank so senior that the officer who offered it had trouble saying it with a straight face. She had accepted exactly one thing: the little kettle S billing computer, which the Joint Commission voted unanimously to give her, and which sat on a shelf in the assay bay between a broken Coran scrubber and a jar of bolts. People asked her about it when they came aboard. They always did. They would look at the ugly little box and ask how she had known, how a 19-year-old salvage hand had found, in 19 days, what 400 million people had failed to find in 214 years. And Wren Calloway, who was not good at speeches and never became good at them, would shrug and say the same thing every time, and every time she would put her hand flat on the top of the box, the way you touch an animal that has been good. "They were all looking in the guns," she'd say. "It was in the plumbing. It was always going to be in the plumbing. Nobody guards the boring things, and the boring things are the only things in the universe that never learned how to lie." Then she would go back to work, because there was always something broken, and the Bellwether was leaving in the morning, and somewhere out there were 9 million people who had never once in their lives been full. The galaxy's deadliest war had lasted 214 years. 400 million soldiers had failed to end it. 40 trillion units a year had been spent keeping it alive, and in the end it had been broken by one ugly ship with a bell on its bow, 31 people who refused to choose a side, and a girl who knew how to listen to a water bill.